So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Contemporary Issues class. We're going to have a good discussion today about Mormonism, and we have our speakers. Ron is going to present about the history of Mormonism, and Jason Gilger. Pleased to have you here, Jason, and want to hear a little bit about what it's like growing up in Mormonism too. And so we're looking forward to talking to you. Before we do that, our usual announcements. Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. Hi, Toby, nice to see you on Zoom. And we are recording this for future playback too. Any other announcements? Things going on, or anybody want to share? Eric just got back from a big trip to Maine. Did you avoid the hurricanes in Maine?
I am.
Good. That's good. It's been a lot of storming. Hey, can you believe the rain in New York City, flooding everything, shutting down that city? Pretty unusual.
Canceled my flight to LaGuardia.
And speaking of shutting down things, amazing the government didn't shut down this today.
Yeah.
We have 45 days, is that?
Yeah.
Another extension, yeah.
We're extended for 45 days. Yeah. Dysfunctional government at work. Okay. Well, with that, we are going to jump in. So we're going to move pretty quickly today so we get everything in. And we want to learn a little about Mormonism. And we want to hear too, if you have any connections to Mormonism or your questions or interests too, because there is a fairly large Mormon population here in Colorado, being so close to Salt Lake City. And so a lot of us have run across Mormons, worked for Mormons. Alice had a Mormon boss, and so a good evergreen topic for us to talk about. With that, let me just give a little introduction to Jason before we start. Jason grew up in Salt Lake City.
Actually, I spent some time in Salt Lake, but I didn't grow up there. My dad was in the Navy.
Okay, go ahead and use the microphone.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I was just saying I didn't grow up in Salt Lake, but I spent time there in the summer. And my dad was in the Navy, so I went here, there, and everywhere until that was over. Thank heaven.
And then you came here when you were how old, Jason?
I came to Denver. I was just short of 21.
Okay. And you went to the School of Mines.
I did.
Very good.
And I went to ILIF and got a Master of Divinity degree.
Wow.
And I spent some, and before that I was over at Regis and got an MBA, which all is to say that I get bored.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to you, okay? We want to go ahead and let Ron start with his slides. And let me mention a couple things that I found about Mormonism too before we start, just to give some context here also. And as Ron talks about the history of Mormonism, the Mormons do spend about 3 hours in their chapel, in their temples each Sunday. Today, doing
Cut to 2 now.
reading. Is it 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Doing readings and hymns and having some kind of sermons also.
Isn't that what we do?
And it's similar to what we do. Yes, they have health guidelines that have come down from their early years, that they abstain from coffee, tea, alcohol, and illegal drugs. Their genealogy, many of us have heard about their genealogy focus, and they believe that Mormon marriages are eternal, that the family is reunited after death and continues. And they baptize the dead so that dead people will join the family after death also. There's some unusual things like young people learn a series of lessons in the temple, and actually then they have an underwear with embroidery that they wear to symbolize their commitment to faith. There are some things that are believed. We'll probably ask Jason a little more about that too, that people progress to a godhood after death. They become like a god. And also the temple is sacred here, and it is private. The church finances are kept private from the members because of, we'll find out and talk about that. And if members can be excommunicated for talking about provocative issues that the church does not wish to talk about. So that's all from Wikipedia. Some of the beliefs and practices too. Just wanted to throw those out as some things to think about, and maybe we'll hear about in the slides or discussion with Jason. So with that, thank you, Ron, for doing this today. And tell us where it came from.
All right, we're going to pass around a couple books. This one, No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody, second edition, put out in about 1945. And it was maybe the first really solid scholarly book done on the Mormon foundations. And she was excommunicated for writing this book. They couldn't find anything in the book that they evil or wrong, but they just didn't like what she presented. She presented the wrong side. By the way, I'm going to pass around these 3 books today, and these are going to get donated to the church library, meaning if you want to borrow one and take it home today, that would be fine. Bring it back and we'll turn it in and check it into the church library and add it to the books that we're adding. So I'll put No Man Knows My History. Looks like there's also a book by Kay Birmingham. She's a lawyer and she grew up in the Mormon church, and she's written a very recent last decade book called An American Fraud. This book is also available take home if you want to learn. And this has got a lot of good personal stories in it about her husband, her son, her experiences, and it's a very touching book because it's very, very personal. So it's both authoritative and accurate because she is a lawyer, but it's also a very touching story. Okay, go that way. And then the Tanners, The Changing World of Mormonism. Again, these 3 books going around, if you want to take it home and read them. Another book, I'm not sure if it's still in print, The Mormon Mirage. So let's get going. I wanted to make one comment on Eric. The Mormon Church has recently come under fire for having amassed a $100 billion financial war chest. And a couple of the Mormons that say, what the heck is going on here? You've stressed for all these families, many of them fairly poor and lower middle class, to pour in all these tithes, and you've amassed this giant hoard of $100 billion. And so it's they're catching some heat for that.
It's just recent.
Very recent, yeah. Okay, next slide. And they've been fined and for hiding the money, putting it under charitable money, getting hidden under, scattered in little shells and different accounts. I like Mark Twain's, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. I also want to say, in a way, this is a tougher presentation to do because I don't like to go in and tear into somebody's religion. You know, I respect, I've known many Mormons, they're kind, good, dedicated people. At the same time, there's a balance. I feel when you have committed fraud, you need to be called out. And there's a lot of examples in today's world, particularly of religious and political figures who have done fraudulent and immoral and whatever kind of things. And quite frankly, I think we have a responsibility to call them out for it when they do these things. Next slide. Okay. Drink the Kool-Aid. That's a phrase that's evolved to mean extreme dedication to a cause or purpose. And we all remember the Jonestown incident in 1978, where a former Assemblies of God leader passed out Kool-Aid down there in Guyana, and over 900 members of that religious movement drank the Kool-Aid as part of the People's Temple and died that day. There were only a handful of survivors. I think there were like 33 survivors of nearly 1,000 people. So it certainly shows the danger of getting into some kind of cult,
And that
yeah,
was after they killed the senator.
yeah. Who landed and was claimed to do it, it was a house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next one.
Wow.
This is a quote from a Mormon leader in 2003. Each of us has to face the matter. Either the church is true, he's referring to the LDS church, or it is a fraud. There's no middle ground. It's estimated that more than 1 million Mormons have resigned from the church
Wow.
since 1995. There's a picture of Joseph Smith. He formed his own, he declared himself a little general and put on a uniform, and there he's giving a speech in his general uniform. We find a lot of people that get into authoritarianism often get into at least 3 areas of sin: financial, sexual, and lust for power. They often start grabbing and groping in all those areas to an intense degree. Joseph Smith is no exception. Next slide. The LDS Church, roughly 17 million worldwide. Although the growth has slowed down, and it's slowed down dramatically in the United States. They're starting to lose a lot of converts here. And so they're adjusting their conversion approach to try to concentrate on poorer areas of the world. When you start losing your converts in the educated areas like Europe and America, where do you go? You head for South America and Africa, where there's poor, uneducated people that are easier to convert and bring into your fold.
Ron,
Yes,
the Book of Mormon, remember that slide?
yeah, yeah. And with the advent of the internet, a lot of this information is now is on the internet. And it's getting harder and harder for the church hierarchy to hide their early history. Next one. Okay, we'll just touch on this, but it's a subject for a class. What harm does it do to follow a nice illusion? And Kay Birmingham in this book lists many of them. I'll just quickly touch on them. Self-identity. The person's when you join a religious or political movement and you start basing your self-identity largely upon your membership in that. Like, I'm a member of this political party or this business movement or this, and when you start really getting your self-identity, of course, Christianity in a way teaches that, giving yourself to Christ, living for Christ, not living for yourself. Kay has said that many of the Mormons get preoccupied with celestial glory. They're so busy working on this dreamy afterlife on some planet far off in the distant solar system that they lose sight of working on environmental issues, social justice, and sometimes their own identity gets blurred. People getting into cults tend to form a mental prison, do's and don'ts, become very rigid. Mind shackles, she calls it. Promotion of fear, books you can't read, thoughts you can't think, domination and control, mind control. So a political or religious movement can very easily start kind of taking control of your life. Personality distortion, psychological injury, sexuality repression and distortion, family and friend relationship division and destruction. People start forming I'm a member of this political party or this religious movement, and it becomes very much an us, them. They don't see people as people anymore. It starts becoming, are they one of us or not one of us? The rational analysis skills get underdeveloped. Loss of emotional intelligence and maturity. And again, I recommend you read Kay's book. It's really a good read. Okay, next. In the mid-1800s, the land was ripe for religious excitement. And here's an example of a whole bevy of religious ponies that got started in the eastern United States in the 1840s, 1830s. William Miller twice proclaimed that Jesus would visit Earth. He first predicting he was going to come back in 1843 and usher in the millennium. Thousands followed him, sold their farms, bought ascension robes to wear for the big day. And of course, it didn't happen. He set another date. It didn't happen. Again, this is William Miller, not Joseph Smith. John Noyes declared the millennium had already begun, started a commune. Of course, got into all kinds of sexual freedom in his commune. Other guys, Matthias Strode wrote about New York City brandishing a sword and a 7-foot ruler shouting he had come to redeem the world. In Southern Ohio, one guy, the Leatherwood god, proclaimed his divinity with shouts and snorts. So if you want to do a study on American religious fanaticism, you just dig into the 1830s and 1840s. Next one. Okay, there's nothing like a good PR. This is one of the better accurate pictures of Joseph Smith. Notice he's got a rather large nose, and that's his death mask. When he was assassinated in Carthage, they actually put a plaster cast on his face, and but the church worked his picture up to get the one on the right, to turn him into a handsome, dashing guy. So there's nothing like a good PR department.
How do you get 35 wives if you're not handsome?
Okay. Next one. Okay, a little history. He was born 1805 in Vermont, assassinated in 1840 in Carthage. Next slide. Let's get into his vision. At age 20, even in his late teens, he got into treasure digging and looking for stones and digging and seeing things. And he got a reputation as a guy to go digging on your property to try to find stuff. And there's quite a bit of historical information affirming that. 1833, a disgruntled ex-Mormon named Hurlbut solicited affidavits for more than 100 persons who knew Joseph before he began his religious career. It was well known that this guy was out doing visions and treasure seeking and hunting. He was hampered by meager education and grinding poverty and claimed to have discovered a seer stone when digging a well. Next slide. Okay. He came up with a couple visions, and the details on these visions and visits vary. They're inconsistent. In 1831, he said, in the 16th year of my age, the Lord opened the heavens upon me, and I saw the Lord. In 1835, he said, well, it was a vision of two personages, God the Father and the Son. So he saw God the Father and God the Son that came visiting. He said, and then he said he was sleeping with his brother in a bed, and the angel Moroni comes and visited him. I think he said maybe visited him a couple times, but yeah. So his vision stories are inconsistent in terms of how many personages visited him and what they said, and what year of your life it was. I don't think you could miss it by 4 years in the consistency of your story, and also not sure whether you saw God the Son and the Father, or just one of them, or just the angel. I think that would kind of, yeah, you'd have a consistent story, but he doesn't have a consistent story. Next thing.
There's the plates.
The golden plates. He claimed that an angel named Moroni, not Macaroni, an ancient Nephite warrior visited him in the fall of 1823, and he was told that this ancient race in America had buried golden plates, had gotten wiped out, and he would have to wait around several years before he could go find and dig up the plates. So here's a vision, and again, a lot of visions and inconsistencies in the story. Next slide. Okay, so Moroni directs Joseph to the golden plates. Next slide. The translation process. If you read that, it's hokey as you can bleed. He claimed that to translate the book, the translator would stay on the other side of the curtain while he stared into a long, tall hat and saw the visions and read the translation to him.
These golden plates had Egyptian-like writing on them. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's
I
what
think- yeah,
Wikipedia said.
yeah.
So it wasn't in any language that Smith could understand.
But so David Whitmer wrote, Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat, put his face in the hat, and exclude the light, and spiritual light would shine. And he'd read the translation to the guy on the other side of the curtain. Next one. Emma Hale. He meets a young gal and marries her. Her father couldn't stand Joseph. So there's more to that. He kind of ran off with Emma, married her, and went back. And the father said to him, "You have stolen my daughter. You spent your time in digging for money, pretending to see, trying to deceive people." Joseph wept, he said, and acknowledged that he didn't see any of his stuff. And he promised to give up digging and looking for stones, but he didn't. His father-in-law couldn't stand it though. Okay, next one. Okay, Joseph Smith. You want to read a book of In Sacred Loneliness. Beginning in the 1830s, at least 33 women married Joseph Smith. And a lot of them were between ages 14 and 20. The majority of them, about a third of them were between 14 and 20. And about a third of them were married. And his wife Emma caught him one time in a locked bedroom with, I think, a 14-year-old girl or something. So he had a real active sex life.
You know, a lot of fathers-in-law too.
Yeah, next one. Okay. The Book of Mormon. There was a book put out by a pastor in New England in the 1830s. And the book is called okay, View of the Hebrews, or the 10 Tribes of Israel in America, published in 1823 by Vermont pastor Ethan Smith. And it talked about how there used to be an ancient white people here in North America, and they were a mighty civilization, and they got wiped out by the bad guys. The bad guys were the Lamanites. The Lamanites were wore short skins around their loins, their heads shaven, skilled with bows and axes. So the Lamanites were kind of
Native
wild Indians, yeah.
They were
But these-
laminated.
But the good guys were the Jaredites, and they were a white and delightsome people. Notice the racial. They were farmers, stock raisers, temple builders, workers in copper, iron, and steel. If you look at the Book of the Mormon, the archaeologists, some of you on the last page of this hand-printed handout, not all of you have it, only about half of you have it. But mentioned in the Book of Mormon were these people in North America who had cows, sheep, goats, pigs, elephants, wheat and barley, houses of wood and cement, spacious buildings, towers, highways, sailing ships, metallurgy of gold and silver. And the archaeologists have said, no way, none of this stuff was or ever has been in North America. Elephants, yeah, all kinds of, it's just pure baloney. And of course, a lot of this was inspired by the mounds. For those who were raised in the Midwest, you're aware of the mound builders and the Indian mounds, particularly in southern Ohio, many areas of the Midwest. But
Ron, just to clarify, could I, so Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon based on his visions or his understanding of what God was trying to tell him, right? And it was about this early race of people that came to America, and they knew about Jesus hundreds of years before, and they witnessed his personal visitation to them after his resurrection.
Yeah.
It said in Wikipedia.
Right, and they were a lost tribe of Israel that got blown across these straits from South America to the Americas by mighty winds.
Okay.
That's the Temple of the Sun, Pyramid of the Sun, north of Mexico City.
Yeah, it looks a lot like it.
So the Mormons used the Bible and the Book of Mormon, right, Jason?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. They have even found, and the Book of Mormon is filled with plagiarisms from the Bible. In fact, they found at least a couple spots where there's a known mistranslation in the King James Bible, and that known mistranslation is put over in the
Carried over.
plagiarism in the Book of Mormon. Next slide. Okay. So again, that book, View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon have a tremendous amount of commonality. It talks about some other things there. Again, claiming the Jaredites were a lost tribe of Israel. Next one. Yeah.
Jim had a question. or
Go ahead.
comment.
Well, I had a comment. I've heard a lot about the multiple wives situation that the Mormons practice and everything, and just to moderate it slightly, I mean, it's obviously pretty gross, but moderate it slightly. In those days, it was fairly common for except among Christians, it was fairly common when men, the heads of households that might have multiple women in the family, when they lost their life anywhere through war or disease or anything like that, for rich men to take them into their household and actually marry them. And by so doing, to save the women's lives. And that was fairly common, especially with people like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, who had umpteen numbers of wives, but they were the richest men in town. I mean, they were the
Yeah.
richest men in the community. And
Absolutely.
so it was argued that they were actually taking care and sheltering these women. The sexual aspect of the thing, I mean, you know, who knows about that?
Okay, next slide. Okay, again, the Book of Mormon tells the story of a group of people called the Jaredites who came to America in 8 small air and watertight barges. They were allegedly in these little submarines with a periscope hole for 344 days, and they brought flocks, herds, and other animals with them. Again, there's nothing for all this stuff that they claim in the Book of Mormon. They certainly didn't, there was no metallurgy here, cement, all that stuff, no way. Next slide. The witnesses. First time I heard the Mormon story was when I was a junior in high school on my front porch. I listened to them and they said, look here, we've got these witnesses in front of the Book of Mormon. But if you look at the printed handout for those that had it, the majority or a high percentage of those 8 or 13 witnesses were either tossed out of the church, excommunicated, or lambasted for being a bunch of immoral jerks by their church themselves. And yet they dared put those witnesses, whom they excommunicated, as witnesses to the veracity of the Book of Mormon. Next slide. The Book of Abraham, and you've got to hand that on that, went in the Cleveland, Ohio area, Kirkland, Ohio. Joseph Smith bought a Egyptian scroll or writing from a dealer who was going through the Cleveland area and said, hey, with my divine knowledge, this is actually was really owned by the biblical character Abraham. And he proceeded to translate it and say, oh yeah, it's got all this religious stuff in it. And nobody could really contest him because they hadn't been able to translate hieroglyphics. But then when Napoleon's army went into Egypt in the 1830s, they found the Rosetta Stone, which had 3 writings in 3 different languages, including hieroglyphics, and that enabled them to decipher hieroglyphics. And so Joseph Smith's translation of this scroll was proven to be totally baloney, total fraudulent baloney. The full story is in your handout. Next slide. Again, the Rosetta Stone unlocked the fraud, and it's a total fraud, as you can tell. If you look at the translation, Smith's interpretation versus the accurate translation. Totally different. Next one. When in Kirtland, Ohio, Smith declared that the audible voice of God instructed him to establish a bank. And he printed his own currency, started a bank. The whole thing collapsed, including, and a lot of people lost big time money. All of the so-called witnesses of the Book of Mormon, with the exception of those Smith family members, left the fold. So he pulled a really great banking fraud scheme among the church members.
Ron, it's
Next one.
11. If we kind of promised Jason that we
Right.
would talk to him starting at 11 for a little bit. If you
Okay.
don't mind, can we take a little break?
Yeah, we're
On the
on
slides,
just 4 more to go.
just 4 more? Okay.
Yeah, so let's whip them through here.
Okay.
Also, in the Mormon history, there's something called the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Where this party of Mormon guys took a caravan coming through Utah country in 1857 and slaughtered dozens of people. Next one. Next slide. Dedication delusion. Simply no polite way to tell people they've dedicated their lives to an illusion. Next slide. Okay. Following Charlie Brown's advice, we'll open it up. And
Read it out loud, hard to read.
if it can be destroyed by the truth, it deserves to be destroyed by the truth.
Okay.
So, okay.
Interesting. Thank you. I didn't know you were so close
Yeah.
to that.
This, by the way, is the Mormon theology for how to get to heaven.
Okay. Interesting.
And the different, or not get to heaven. Go other
Christians have
places.
that too.
So,
Okay, Jason, if
Jason,
you
take it
use
away.
the microphone. Thank you, Ron. Jason, did you grow up where your folks both Mormons, and did you grow up from birth in the temple, or
Yeah, I was born,
hold it closer to your mouth?
I was born into the church, yeah, so.
Good.
Did
Great, sorry.
turn it off.
1, 2, 3.
There you go.
Oh, here we go.
That better?
No.
I can't. Did you turn it off by accident?
It's got a twisty thing here. 1, 2, 3, and hold it up real close to.
Oh. But they always told me not to eat the microphone when you hold it in the mouth, so that's why I'm a little. No, not that hungry.
So did you grow up, were your folks Mormon, and did you grow up early Mormon?
I did, I was born into the church, and, something my parents won't admit to, but I found out later. There were a couple of silly teenagers and they had the happy accident, so, I went with my little sister when my parents were sealed in the temple. But ordinarily what happens is you get married in the temple first and then all your kids
Oh.
belong under that covenant, so you don't take your little kids with you after that, but anyway. I did want to mention there's only one temple here in Colorado, and it's the one off of Otero, and that's members only, and then every other Mormon building you see is for Sunday worship, and some of them can be very large and imposing. But the temple is used for the redemption of the dead. And so that's why, and there's a lot of sacred things that got put on the internet when Mitt Romney was running for president, and it made me worry because they really went in and just no, you don't do that to somebody's faith. But anyway,
So when you grew up, did you have like a Sunday school where you learned about the Book of Mormon, or what kind of education was there?
well, we had Sunday school, primary for the kids between 3 and 12. And then you had youth group from 12 to 18. And then, the high school kids, and I was not healthy enough at the time. It was after I was diagnosed with my Crohn's disease. I couldn't get up and go to the 5 a.m. meeting for 4 years. And that always upset my dad, but now I love to point out that I went to ILIF, so I did go to seminary after all. and, you know, having family in Utah, being a Mormon was just kind of part of who you are, and it really turns into a cultural identity, whether you really are into the church or not, because they have their own lingo about everything, and they have their own.
Family gatherings, get-togethers.
They tried to do, I shouldn't say. Family home evening when I was growing up was always on Monday evening, and I couldn't figure out why it was on Monday, because we spent so much time on Sunday, but anyway. That was supposed to be time for you to be together with your family. And my dad served 20 years in the Navy with the submarines, so my mom spent a lot of time at church, and she gave a lot of time at church while I was growing up. And they have a lay ministry. Nobody goes to theology school to become a Mormon, anything. And that was a lot of fun that I had, was talking to the Mormons in the military that were studying to be chaplains. And they couldn't understand why I'd leave. And I said, well, I didn't leave for anything doctrinal, and nobody bothered me. I just, the local congregation near my house wasn't real welcoming, and I didn't feel good there. And a lot of times you have to go for a year before you get to know people. And was when my wife got here, we needed to spend time to build a relationship, and she said she didn't feel welcome either. But the hard part about being a Mormon is you can't say this congregation doesn't agree with me, so I'm gonna go 2 blocks over here, because they want you where you live, so they can keep track of you, I guess, or you know, for things that are so that's why it's one of the big reasons why I'm here.
I have a question about why you decided to leave the faith, and also I understand that being sealed to your family is a big deal. And does that mean that you are no longer sealed to your family?
No, that's a really, I don't want to say that's kind of gets right down to the point, but it's kind of a minor thing. I'm still technically sealed to my parents, because I haven't been excommunicated. And what happens is, I think I've made it onto a do not contact list. But as far as the Mormons are concerned, I'm still a Mormon, because they don't scrub their rolls every year.
Oh, okay. You're just inactive.
I'm inactive, and so every once in a while, and it's been fairly recent. I know Matt Winkle, my friend, had to help me chase the Mormons off the porch, because I had just got home from my therapeutic massage and was in no shape to take visitors into the house. Just, this is not a good time. And anyway, so, and people would tell me, well, if you really want to be rid of that, you just need to move and not give them your new address. And I'm like, I don't want to move just for that. So yeah, that's not a good reason to move, but.
Jason, what do you think today about the Book of Mormon and the visions and some of the practices compared to Methodism and other Christianity, for example? How do you look back on Mormonism today, having grown up in it?
Well, that's kind of a hard question. I know for me, once you've been in it so long, things on Sunday mornings start to repeat, you know. And Ron brought up a good point, because I didn't realize they had officially cut down to 2 hours from 3, because it was always 3 hours when I was growing up since 1980.
Was it required 3 hours, or that was just a custom?
It was a custom, yeah. You'd go to 3 hours at church on Sunday morning, and if you had the misfortune of living with my dad, you had to go to all 3 hours, because that was just how it was.
What's the checklist to be in good standing?
Well, if you've gone to the temple and had your endowment, you're required to wear the garments day and night. You need to be that's another thing I was going to point out. If you do ask about those, if you're curious, just be careful, because you're asking about somebody's underwear, and I don't know, that just gets to be a little personal sometimes. What was I saying?
The tithing.
Yeah, there's 10% tithing and I don't know, they don't keep track of your income. So if you choose to pay on your net instead of your gross, they even make that argument on The Simpsons, which makes me laugh. But when you go for a temple recommend, which is why all that is important to them, if you want to go to the temple to see your daughter married, for example, they have a given set of questions that they read specifically that way in order, because people in the past have gone way off the rails and asked things that were entirely inappropriate. But what you're asked is to pretend the Savior is asking you these questions, and I'm just here to facilitate. Nobody's there to judge you. So you're given a permit or not based on what you tell them. So, but as far as tithing goes, they'll ask you, do you pay a full tithe? And so it's up to you to decide, am I paying enough money or not? Because nobody's going to ask about your income or anything.
Okay.
So,
Question over here, Doug.
This different perspectives from both you and Ron, if I can on this, but not counting children who were raised in the church, but what is the growth? There's been a lot of religions since the time of Christ that have come and gone. And Mormonism has obviously stayed. What has prompted that growth from the time of Smith on that has caused that? And not children, I understand, again, being indoctrinated, but just the average person coming to the church. What has caused the church to grow so much and stay where it is today?
wow, that's a good question. I didn't ask, but
But it hasn't grown.
well, if you let me see how to phrase this.
International is great.
It's grown American too.
Well, if you look,
He said it's declining.
one of the
No, I'm talking.
well, one of the things that a new Mormon convert to the church will tell you, or anybody who was converted rather than born into the church will tell you that that they give you enough information on how to live your day-to-day life that really works. They help you with, they can help you with they do like all churches do, they help you raise your kids and that kind of thing. And it has a strict set of rules, and some people enjoy that, or but it really can be it can be a positive thing. It just turned into a negative thing for me where I just couldn't do it anymore. But like I say, I'm still considered a Mormon, and my family they haven't thrown me out or anything. And that's real common too, is if you tell them you're not a Mormon, that'll happen where your family will disown you. So I've
But
had
they
that.
haven't done that with you.
No.
So that's good.
That's good.
Eric,
If Christians believe that Jesus was God, what do the Mormons think about Jesus? Do they consider themselves Christians?
They do. They very much do. In fact, they're real big. They've got back on they did this years and years ago in the 20s or 30s. They didn't want to be called Mormons because it was a nickname. And then they realized that the media and everybody does whatever they want to do. So we're going to make Mormon the most positive thing we can make out of it. And now they've come back around. The pendulum's come back the other way. And now if you ask them, they'll say, no, I'm not a Mormon. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But that's a mouthful. But they do consider themselves Christians, and their thought is on the Trinity, that God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit are three distinct personages that are one in purpose. So when they say God is one, they're all one.
So they don't believe in the divinity of Christ.
They do.
They do.
Yeah, and they don't. I've never heard it in the Mormon church where they would talk about whether, for example, Jesus was fully human or fully divine. They don't get into that whole.
Wikipedia describes it as Orthodox Mormonism believes the Father and Jesus have perfected, glorified physical bodies, while the Holy Ghost is a spirit without a physical body. They also believe that there is a heavenly mother who is the wife of God the Father, and that faithful Latter-day Saints may attain godhood in the afterlife. Joseph Smith wrote that God was once a man on another planet before being exalted to godhood. Is that sound accurate to you, Jason?
I'll accept the other planet kind of business, because anytime they talk about the hereafter,
Uh-huh.
they'll say that the hereafter is actually here.
Oh, okay,
So, but,
interesting.
Well, they teach that you can exalt yourself to godhood. Work your way up through being a wonderful person every day. Keep working your way up the moral celestial rank until you
It works.
get off. When you die, go to the celestial paradise where you get, you have a wild sex life, populate this planet with children. Of course, for the woman, the thought of being a perpetual baby machine isn't an idea of paradise for some. But yeah,
I was gonna say, we're trending towards this polygamy topic, and I'm really interested to know. I thought it was no longer practiced, and that in Utah it was, I guess, the law or something, but I just wanted to know, in general, is it an accepted practice?
not for the mainstream Mormon church.
Sorry.
there are some splinter Mormon church
The mainline,
organizations that still
yeah,
do it.
the mainline Mormon church out of Salt Lake City does not do that, and if they find out you're keeping an extra wife at home, they'll turn you in, but that's also one thing I wanted to make clear is that the mainstream Mormon church is not in any way affiliated with this Warren Jeffs thing that, so,
Yeah.
that was
Joy.
I was in Salt Lake this summer. You couldn't recognize the temple because there was scaffolding all around it. And the word was they were making an earthquake proof.
Okay.
You have any comments on that?
I hadn't heard that. I know they like to,
Huh.
my grandmother tells me that she lives in southern Utah, and they had closed the St. George Temple for renovation. They go in and,
Kind of speaking of that, Jason, there is the Mormon practice of stockpiling food for the future. Does that have anything to do with a belief in the end times or tribulation, or is that more a just cultural thing to have extra food on hand?
Well, I remember my dad doing that when I was a little kid, and it wasn't necessarily for any, the end of the world is coming. It was more for practical use, because I know in the late 70s there was a trucker strike, and one of the truckers on strike had our stuff. We had just moved, and we're showing up at the house with nothing, and so I like to think of it as a 3-day emergency food supply, but just more.
Jason, could you unpack a little bit the notion of baptizing for the dead?
Yeah.
Okay, the Mormons believe in the redemption of the dead. So what happens in the temple is you go once for yourself, and they used to call that a live session, but that gets confusing. So you go once for your own, but then after that, you go in and you're given a name, and you do the ordinances for and in behalf of them. But the Mormons believe that they want everybody to be baptized, so they have that available to them in the hereafter. We've done this for you, and if you want it, but if you don't, that's okay. And I know I watched something on PBS about Mormons, and they did both sides, and I guess the Mormons got a hold of a whole bunch of Jewish names, and they went through and did the baptisms, and the Jewish people didn't appreciate that. We want to be Jews, not Mormons. So, but they do that because they believe these ordinances can only happen here. And so they want everybody to be able to take advantage of that in the hereafter.
At what point did they welcome in blacks and other minorities?
Yeah, that's a ticklish question, because I never did get even a straight answer. And I did a Mormon mission in Anaheim, California. I was called for 2 years and I made it for about 4 months. And that wasn't because of my faith. I had active Crohn's disease and the stress just made it worse. And I came home on a medical release. What were we saying about?
When were they
Oh.
accepted in the church?
Okay.
Like.
I can answer that. The head prophet and revelator, there's the top dog of the Mormon church.
President, yeah.
And he had a vision around 1963, 64, saying that they should adopt, allow blacks. Because the Mormon theology was intensely racist and prejudiced against blacks. But I was told by some folks that lived in Salt Lake City, they saw it coming. The civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, they were confident God was going to speak and tell the Mormon church it needed to change its ways.
It was time.
And
to
they
change.
did, yeah, they did get a revelation, right, at the time of Martin Luther King's peak
Yeah.
career. And
We've
change.
got, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We've got about 8 minutes left. I want to give our Zoomers a chance to ask a question so they don't feel like they're interrupting. Susan has her hand up. Go ahead, Susan.
What are they doing with this $100 billion fund? How do they invest it, or are they contributing to certain political ideology where through their investments, or what are they doing with all this money?
I couldn't tell you. I will tell you that there's never a mention of. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I would just say that I don't know what they're doing with this $100 million they've gathered, but when you go, did I say million?
Billion.
Sorry. One thing I can tell you from being a Mormon is when you go into a Mormon church during the formal service, there's no call for an offering. And then when you turn in your tithing, and I've been out of the church for 10 or 12 years, so it's probably different now. But there's a little disclaimer on the bottom of your receipt that says that the money you give to the church for tithing is used for their sole discretion. So you can't necessarily say, well, I want it to be for the hurricane relief or anything. And so that's why there's no mention of money. I mean, you're told that by the missionaries when you convert, but they don't talk about it afterward.
I know they built a multi-million-dollar tower somewhere, a business tower, and they kind of kept that hidden. And the Hunt, is it the Hunt or the Huntsman family has really come down on the Mormon church, and they are Mormons, saying, hey, what are you doing with this 100 billion stash you've got?
Okay, Steve Horse.
Yeah, hey Jason, thanks for being here today. I've got a dietary question about caffeine, Coca-Cola and coffee. Well, when was Coca-Cola allowed to be drank, or has it? When was Dr. Pepper allowed to be drank?
I can give you the pat answer, but I can't guarantee it'll be satisfying. The leadership of the church prayed about that, because there's in the 89th section of the Doctrine and the Covenants, which is their book of polity, they talk about strong drinks are bad for you and hot drinks are bad. So somebody said, well, what's a hot drink? Then they came back and said, well, it's coffee and tea. So iced tea, iced coffee, it doesn't matter. No coffee, no tea. However, they don't have a specific prohibition on any kind of soda. When I was in Provo at BYU right out of high school, I asked my bishop, I said, well, I can get sick and jittery on too much Dr. Pepper. So he says, I know, so don't drink too much of that either, but it's just kind of a wink and a nod. But yeah, I don't, there are some families that only drink Sprite and they won't have any caffeine in the house than other people. And if you're like me, you've had coffee and tea your whole life, because my grandmother was that way. So
I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead, Grant.
I would dare say that acceptance of African Americans, Latinos, and so forth has as much or more to do with the athletic program at BYU than anywhere else. I'm just saying, it's just a comment that all of a sudden, about, I don't know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, they were accepted. And so now you see quite a few African Americans on the football team. Just saying.
Well, and just to clear that up, you don't have to be a Mormon to go to BYU, but they did when I was there, at least they had 2 sets of tuition rates. And so, and as you might imagine, being a Mormon was cheaper, but while you were there, you had to go to church and keep in touch with the bishop. Because if you didn't get your ecclesiastical endorsement and your tuition went up. So just because BYU can bring in all these fine athletes doesn't mean that they're all Mormons.
Oh, okay. Norley.
Can I just say, like, if you're a potential Mormon, you can go to BYU, but if you're an ex-Mormon, they kick you out and they won't let you in, if that makes sense. So.
I hadn't heard that one there.
Thank you, Raina.
I just wanted to say quickly, there's so many people here who are sort of laughing, and I get it, but I'm thinking, is this considered to be a cult in the US, or is it considered to be a religion like any other denomination of
Good question.
Christianity? Good question.
Jason, how do you view that?
Personally, I think that Mormonism is a established religion. And I don't know, people like to use the word sect too often. But then you have to remember it wasn't so long, well, I guess it was a long time ago that Christianity was a sect too. So it's just a matter of, some people get set off by that word sect when
A high percentage of the evangelical community considers Mormonism a cult.
That's what my history is, and that's the
Yeah.
way I was raised, but
And a
exposure
lot
to
of
people who have that faith tradition is. makes
Less
it-
so in Methodist, Presbyterian, centrist.
Evangelicals think.
And some other people consider evangelical Christians a cult.
Yes.
Raina, are you folks Mormon? Do you have any connection? Do you mind if I ask?
Oh, yeah. We were both raised Mormon or brainwashed Mormon.
Okay.
We're over 40 and we only left about a year ago.
Cool.
And so between the two of us, we've put about probably $200,000 in worth of tithing, and we want it back. And yeah, it's crazy. The brainwashing goes deep and it causes a big mess. It's been very traumatic leaving. We've had people shun us, and yeah, it's been a wild ride leaving. And to call it a cult when you're a member, that's very triggering. You're like, no, it's not a cult. No, it's not a cult. And you don't see it as a cult until you leave and realize all the things they do to brainwash you.
Manipulation.
Yeah.
Social, mental, emotional manipulation. It's heavy.
Yeah.
What were the key factors that enabled you to pull loose?
Well, they try and hide their history from the members. They give you sort of a whitewashed version of it, an incorrect version. And so he was really into religious histories and then started studying our own religious history. And then he came to me and said, I don't believe any of this anymore. And I panicked, like, what are you doing? This is our salvation at stake. What are you doing to our family? And we're going to fall apart. We won't be together in the eternities. And, all this panic inside, until I started reading the actual history from historical documents themselves, like journals and bank statements and newspapers and stuff, the stuff they tried to hide from the members. And they'll tell you, don't delve into that because it'll just shake your faith or whatever, And so I started reading all that, and it was really eye-opening and crushing. I went through a really heavy grief period, realizing that I had been lied to my whole life. So I'm doing better now, though. So,
Okay, you would enjoy Kay's book that I mentioned.
what is it called?
The American Fraud by Kay Burningham.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
we're glad you all joined us today. Do you go to St. Andrew here now, or have you been
No.
here?
No, we're actually still in Utah. we're looking to moving, but.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
okay. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We just got a couple more minutes left in our hour class, but thank you. Any more questions or comments from our Zoomers? And folks here? I thought it was very interesting today. Thank you, Jason, so much for being with us, and thank you, Ron, for the presentation.
My her husband kept
Do this. Yeah. Nice to have you all here with us. Take care. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, the books are available if anybody would